What's up, everybody? Nick Whalen here. John McKechnie here with you on this wonderful Wednesday, August 7th. Got plenty of news to discuss. We got Christian McCaffrey injury news. We got, I'd like to say Brandon Aiyuk trade news, John, but is it really news at this point? It feels like we have an update like every hour. So whatever we talk about with Brandon Aiyuk at the beginning of this pod could change by the end. I want to just put that out there as a waiver, but a lot to discuss here. We'll talk about some of our favorite, I don't know if I want to call them sleepers, mid to late round values. You know, everybody's definition of a sleeper is different, but we got a lot of running backs and receivers that I want to kind of throw your way. We'll bat those around. Some of the guys we're targeting once you get beyond pick 100, beyond pick 120, some of the late round darts that we're throwing in best ball leagues. But before we get into that, we got some great sponsors on the pod today, including the Circa Resort and Casino, the Circa Sportsbook out in Las Vegas. The biggest pro football contests in Vegas are back this season. Circa Survivor and Circa Million are up to $16 million in guaranteed prizes, 2 ways to win, and no rake. Circa Survivor contestants select one team each week with no point spread. You last the longest, and you win it all with $10 million guaranteed. In Circa Million, all you got to do is make 5 picks against the spread each week for your share of $6 million guaranteed. Quarterly and full season payouts are in play here. They also got the booby prize. If you finish dead last, which should be just as difficult as winning the contest, I believe it's $100K awarded to you for that. You got to enter in Nevada, but you could play from anywhere. Visit circasports.com for details. I played in Circa Million last year, John. You helped me a lot throughout the season consulting on our picks. We had a respectable finish. You know, we didn't take home $6 million. I'm going to be clear about that, but a ton of fun. Looking forward to jumping back in on the Circa Million contest this year. They even gave me this cool hat that does not fit my head whatsoever, but it makes for a nice display behind me. Anyway, let's talk Christian McCaffrey. And, you know, this news came down yesterday, so we don't have any significant developments other than Christian McCaffrey dealing with a calf strain, unlikely to play in the preseason. The preseason thing to me doesn't really matter that much. I mean, how much Christian McCaffrey were we going to see in the preseason anyway? Probably very limited snaps. You know, that's kind of a footnote, but you know, I mean, he's going to miss a couple weeks of practice. We're not that far from week 1, almost exactly a month, in fact. So that's obviously the bigger concern here. And, you know, Christian McCaffrey, I think in some ways is coming off of about a best case scenario health season in 2023. You know, he got banged up toward the end, missed that meaningless week 18 game, but was back, looked like himself in the postseason. But this is a guy that in 2020 and 2021 was near the top of the list of, you know, injury risks, not only at his position, but in all of fantasy football. And I don't know that we can just completely erase that, right? I mean, that was in Carolina. He's in a different situation, but at the same time, you know, I think that's still something that's in the back of your mind. My question to you, John McKechnie, is if you're doing a draft this week, are you now reconsidering taking Christian McCaffrey at the 1-1? And if so, who gets bumped up?
I think you have to at least think about it. Whereas, you know, earlier in draft season, like up until like Saturday or Sunday, if you had the number 1 pick, you were taking Christian McCaffrey because, you know, first of all, like just the way that draft orders work, like you're not going to get the first overall pick that often. So like you're just kind of general exposure to Christian McCaffrey isn't going to be as high as it will be to like, you know, players in the mid to late first round. So you just want to jump on that opportunity. You want the potential to have Christian McCaffrey on your team. But now it does give you pause because like you said, you know, we've had some healthy seasons recently in 22 and 23 from him, but you know, we're entering the age 28 season here. He just is coming off of like almost like 350 total touches last season. That's a lot. We already have some turf burns from this training camp already. It's concerning to say the least. So I think if you do draw the number 1 spot, if you do have that receiver that you've kind of in the back of your mind been thinking like, oh, it'd be cheeky if I took him first overall, maybe it wouldn't be so cheeky now. Maybe it would be a prudent idea to take a CeeDee Lamb or a Tyreek Hill or a Jamar Chase with that first overall pick, just to diversify a little bit. I wouldn't hit the panic button necessarily just yet. You know, I think at this point we feel good about him being ready week 1, but you do need to be worried about, you know, these soft tissue things. Re-aggravation is always the big concern there. So No longer is Christian McCaffrey like that don't think about it lock as the number one overall pick, but I'm still at this stage not going to like blame anyone for taking him still up top. And putting the shoe on the other foot, if I'm picking second or third and the drafters in front of me have decided to go the other route and fade Christian McCaffrey within that draft, I'm gonna try to get that, because that's gonna end up being a pretty unique build. Like, there aren't going to be too many teams out there that have been drafted already that have McCaffrey while also not having to draft it at the tail end of the second round. So I think that could create some interesting builds if McCaffrey does slide. I think I'm more attuned to take him if he does fall.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly makes that decision a little bit easier if he's sitting there at like the seventh pick. I don't know if we get to that point. I think a few weeks from now, if this hamstring is lingering and he's still not practicing and we're halfway through the preseason, maybe then you see that. But I saw some people threw some polls out on Twitter yesterday. It's like, is Christian McCaffrey still the 1-1? And over 50% of the respondents were saying yes. So I think most people are still in, but there is some risk here. I think what makes it an interesting debate as well is there's not, at least in my mind, John, there's not an obvious, okay, this guy now becomes the 1-1. If you are worried about Christian McCaffrey, it's like you look at the other options, like, well, CeeDee Lamb is holding out right now. Tyreek Hill is 30 years old. Bijan Robinson, yeah, you can make the case for that if you want to go running back, but still some questions about what that Atlanta offense will look like. You can make a case for Breece Hall, but then you got Jamar Chase, who you'll sometimes see go 2 or 3 in drafts. He's got a contract situation hanging over his head. Justin Jefferson, new quarterback situation in Minnesota. So I do think if you're going to go receiver there, Tyreek Hill is kind of the path of least resistance to me. Again, you do worry about the age. It did feel like over the second half of last season, like every single game, Tyreek Hill was like leaving the game, but would be on the sidelines, and he would come in and then he would go out. But it's not like he's coming off of some sort of serious injury or even, something that nagged him throughout the year. It was just kind of nicks and cuts. So I think Tyreek Hill to me is the easiest sell. And, obviously upside wise, you don't expect much of a fall off in what should again be a really, really good Dolphins passing game.
Right. I mean, that offense, it's humming. Like Mike McDaniel, as long as he's there orchestrating this, and you have, like, it's not just Tyreek that really makes him a great pick. It's just the fact that there's so much speed elsewhere in that offense. The defenses can only allocate so much help. And they kind of just have to hope and pray to just be able to contain Tyreek in a given week, because if you do too much, roll too much coverage, Jalen Waddle's going to burn you, Devin Achane's going to burn you, Raheem Mostert. I mean, the list really goes on there. So the explosive numbers, those spike weeks that we love, especially in best ball, those are absolutely in play there for Tyreek. And I've said it multiple times on our RotoWire podcast and to you. I love Jamar Chase this year. I could see him ending up finishing as the wide receiver 1, and with that in mind, he could end up being the 1-1 overall. So, there's a couple different ways you can go about it now as a result of this McCaffrey thing. And I do wonder, if we do end up looking back and saying that we overreacted to this, and, the people that faded McCaffrey at 1 end up regretting it.
Very possibly. Very possibly. There's also always that thought in the back of your mind of like, man, McCaffrey had about as good of a season as you could possibly have as a modern day NFL running back, especially in fantasy. What are the chances he repeats that? And it's like, well, everything's in place that should be replicable. Obviously McCaffrey, the player, you don't really have any doubts about, but health-wise, it's always going to be in the back of your mind. Sticking with the 49ers, the Brandon Aiyuk situation continues to develop. The Steelers are out, then they're in. The Patriots are out, then they're in. It seems like they're now on the outs here. I think it's really, really interesting, how this story has been handled. And the 49ers, for their part, whether they've, whether it's commentary from guys like John Lynch or Kyle Shanahan, or, reporting in San Francisco media, they are very much putting the ball in Brandon Ayuk's court here. And I think, ideally, if you're the Niners, you find a way for Brandon Aiyuk to play out this season, but you still do need to think long-term. There's been reports out there that if they do deal him, they would want a receiver coming back, specifically, Amari Cooper. If you were to trade him to the Browns, I think that would be a guy who would make a ton of sense as far as not seeing a dramatic decline in the product on the field in 2024, because I still think, last year was the 49ers' best chance. That was maybe the best roster that they'll have in terms of the age, in terms of the health of guys like McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel. But this is still a loaded team. They're absolutely a Super Bowl contender. That's not a take by any means. If you remove Brandon Aiyuk and you deal him for a picks-based package, that's a pretty big hole to fill. You're still a really good team, but that's a big hole to fill. So in terms of, the back and forth here, there's so much going on. Like Brandon Aiyuk does not have a no trade clause, but in effect, he kind of does. Right? It's like they need Brandon Aiyuk to sign off on, yes, I will resign, whatever contract is being worked under the table. I will accept that. Obviously the team that's bringing Brandon Aiyuk in needs to be okay with that contract. And then on the back end, the 49ers still need to agree to actually trade him on the compensation package. And when you put it that way, I think it's easy to see why there's been so much confusion here. What is your read right now? Do you think there's a situation that's the most likely landing spot at this juncture for Aiyuk?
Yeah, that Twitter has become exhausting. If you're on NFL Twitter, it's just a constant. This is what I'm hearing right now. It's a bunch of nothing, but a little bit of something always baked in there. It does feel to me like the Patriots are out. So I think that we can kind of distill this down to either the Niners being able to retain Aiyuk or shipping him off to either Pittsburgh or Cleveland. I think if I were putting odds on it, I think the Steelers would be the favorite in that case. Would the Steelers move George Pickens to make that deal go? I'm not entirely sure. But, if you're looking at the Niners, like to your point, last year, not to say that their window's closed, but you mentioned so many factors last year, like how loaded the defense was, how loaded the offense was, and the window, like it might be getting close here because they have so many big contracts on the books. Not Brandon Aiyuk notwithstanding here, but they're going to have to make that call on Brock Purdy here pretty soon. They're already paying Christian McCaffrey a ton, George Kittle a ton, Deebo Samuel a ton. I mean, the list really
Williams
goes on.
Is asking for a new deal.
Yeah, Bosa. I mean, there's a ton of expensive pieces on that team already, and you wonder if they're kind of reaching critical mass salary-wise.
They built too good of a roster.
It's way to go, John Lynch. But as a result, if Brandon Aiyuk gets moved, I guess there's two paths here. Like they either get the replacement in that trade, whether it's Pickens or Amari Cooper, in which case, we feel good about this 49ers offense. We still feel good about investing in Brock Purdy where he goes. We feel good about investing in either of Pickens or Cooper at whatever their new ADP is, at least we presume. But if Aiyuk goes and it's a picks-based package, I'm a little bit concerned about this offense all of a sudden because Deebo isn't necessarily the picture of durability. I love watching Deebo Samuel play football, but his play style is one that kind of invites a lot of contact. And, George Kittle, same deal. If you watch receiver, his shoulder gets banged up constantly. I mean, same deal with Samuel last year, and McCaffrey has a pretty significant injury history in his own right. So, I mean, the Niners would be, they're going to have to be putting a lot of pressure on Ricky Pearsall, who already is getting dinged up a lot in training camp as well. So I think you can look a little bit further down the list if Aiyuk gets moved and neither Cooper nor Pickens come back in that deal. I'm interested in Juwan Jennings and I'm interested in Jacob Cowing. I think both of those guys are players that you can get in the last round or two rounds of your best ball drafts right now. And I think both of them are good football players. Cowing he's undersized, but just imagine, if you will, just Tank Dell from last year, but drafted a little bit later. Very similar skill set, very similar build. He's a guy that's a burner that can go underneath it, that can make plays down the field as well. Really productive player during his time in college. So keep an eye on him. And then I feel like Juwan Jennings just all offseason has been underrated. I suppose, there is the argument where it's like there's not enough mouths to feed to where Jennings is going to be a consistent producer. But when he's called upon, he's always done well. And I feel like if he gets moved into a bigger role, which I think he'd be the next man up if Aiyuk is gone, I think people that invested in Jennings are going to end up being very happy with it. He's not an explosive downfield guy, but he's a great boundary guy. He's kind of like a physical, like a Mike Williams type, can get down the field a little bit, make those plays on the boundaries, make the contested catches. And, so I definitely have my eye on Jennings mostly right now. And I'm interested to see, if his ADP starts to creep up here a little bit.
We have already seen Deebo Samuel's ADP rise a little bit, about 3 spots if you just isolate the last couple of days on the NFFC, which is interesting. And I think, it's pretty easy to follow the through line there of if Brandon Aiyuk is gone and you don't bring back somebody like Amari Cooper, or in theory, I guess the Steelers could send George Pickens to the Niners, which would be interesting. And we could talk about that in a moment. But There is a world in which all of a sudden Deebo Samuel is kind of back to being the clear number one receiver in this offense. Maybe they get him more involved in the running game like he was a couple of years ago. Although as much fun as that is, I durability wise, I almost don't want that. It's like just keep that receiver, limit the hits to that shoulder. But there's no real way to I think strategize right now because we have absolutely no idea what's going to happen with Brandon Aiyuk. Although I'm a lot more confident now than I was a week ago or even 3 days ago that Brandon Aiyuk will be moved. The other side of this, of course, is landing spots for Brandon Aiyuk. We could talk about what it means to lose him if you're the 49ers, but if you're the Browns, if you're the Steelers, we could say the Patriots are maybe still on the fringes of this discussion. Maybe there's a mystery team involved now that it's, essentially public. And it seems like the Niners are basically fielding offers. If he ends up in Pittsburgh, we'll say that, that as of this juncture feels like perhaps the most likely situation. If he ends up in Pittsburgh and they don't send George Pickens back, and we'll see if the Niners are willing to accept that, what does that do for Brandon Aiyuk's ADP?
So Aiyuk's ADP right now over on Underdog is right around 24, and it's been trending down. Kind of the other side effect of this trade discussion with Deebo trending up just a little bit. So I think that he probably goes closer to like the middle of the third. I think in like that DJ Moore, Stephon Diggs, Michael Pittman type of territory. And going into that Pittsburgh offense, I've been comfortable getting a decent amount of George Pickens this year, where he goes, as more of like a mid fourth guy. Aiyuk probably more talented and the more, or I wouldn't go that far, but definitely extremely talented player, and you figure he's going to draw like a huge amount of the targets. But clock's ticking. You got to learn that offense. I feel like if he gets traded, it's going to be hard for him to exactly return huge value for his investors. So I'm probably continue to take guys like DJ Moore or Michael Pittman. I'd sprinkle some Aiyuk in, of course, but I'm still skeptical of the surrounding pieces there in Pittsburgh, especially when it comes to the quarterback position, to where this is an offense that can really fuel for fantasy. Two top 24 type of receivers in terms of fantasy production. So that's where I stand on that. And then I would imagine that Pickens's ADP would crater pretty significantly as a result of this. I think we're talking like well into the fifth round as a result if Aiyuk were to go there. And I think I would continue to get in on the new price, but I wouldn't be getting him as aggressively as I have been to this point in the offseason.
It's an offense that threw 13 passing touchdowns last year and remedied that by bringing in Arthur Smith. So it's like, I don't know that this solves the overall issue of, quarterback play, questionable offensive coordinating for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but it would certainly be a talent grab, and more so to me, really for all these teams that are involved or rumored to be involved, whether it's Washington or New England or Cleveland or Pittsburgh. The Browns are the only one to me where this would be like a win now move. If he's going to New England, it's like, does that change whether or not you think they win more or less than 4.5 games, which is their over under the season? Like probably not. That's hey, we want a number one receiver to develop alongside Drake May. So yeah, I think there would still be a ton of question marks. It would make me feel better about the Steelers offense, but the quarterback play is ultimately the issue. I don't know that, bringing in another top flight wide receiver 100% quells those concerns for me, right? I still think we're going to see Justin Fields at some point this year, and you can give him all the weapons that you want in the passing game. I don't think that necessarily turns things around. Uncle Ted, who always gives great commentary here, throughout our live pod, says straight up, Pickens for Aiyuk. Would you do it? I would imagine that this question has been batted around during these trade talks.
Oh, okay. So as far as the trade between the Steelers and
yeah,
the
we're not
Niners,
talking fantasy. We're saying if you're the Niners and the Steelers, would you consider this deal?
Well, okay. So we're entering Pickens' third season. Right. He wasn't a first round pick, so you're going to have to deal with his contract sooner rather than later as a result. But it feels like the acrimony within this Niners organization and Aiyuk, like combined, it's like, ooh. That might be enough to get it done. Maybe Pittsburgh has to send a pick along the way on top of it to kind of sweeten the deal. Yeah. So I think at this juncture, I probably would make that move if I'm the Niners, because I think Pickens can pick up and do extremely well in whatever the Brandon Aiyuk role that would be vacated would be. So I think it would make sense for both sides if this ended up being straight up, but I have a hard time envisioning that being the exact case. I don't think that these NFL trades end up ever being as clean as just a 1-for-1, especially at the same position.
Yeah, there's a reason you almost never see that. It's an interesting hypothetical for sure. I think for Pittsburgh, you're in maybe a slightly better position with Aiyuk over Pickens. But for the 49ers, you're just kind of kicking the can down the road as far as that contract goes, right? You kind of buy yourself one more year to potentially figure something out with Pickens, but it's not like he's going into his rookie year or his second year, right? I mean, you're still going to have to deal with that contract at some point. I think you can make the case that it better aligns with some of their other contracts. It's like, they have the potential out with Deebo Samuel after this season, and maybe you kind of develop George Pickens as the future of that team. But again, I think the 49ers are playing for now, right? The way this roster is built, this is not outside of Brock Purdy, this is not an up and coming roster. This is a roster that wants to win as soon as it can. Outside of the 49ers, who we've talked about now for a full 20 minutes, we got the Indianapolis Colts, and we got some news out of Colts camp. Josh Downs, who's been getting a ton of steam in the fantasy world over the last couple of weeks, by all accounts, has been having a nice camp. Dealing with a high ankle sprain, went down at practice. Saw some reports that Shane Steichen was not happy that he was tackled during practice. That it was one of their safeties, I think, brought him down, and he had to give a press conference saying yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm also, we're playing football here, so I'm not really that sorry. But awkward situation for him. Either way, we don't have a timetable quite yet from the Colts on Josh Downs, but Ian Rappaport said, speculation already that this could be a 4 to 6 week injury.
Right. So, I mean, that puts him on the precipice of missing the first week of the season, maybe even the first 2 weeks. I think if you're Indianapolis, you pretty much just let this run its course. And when Downs is ready to go once again, then you press play. You don't want it to have him risk re-aggravating an injury like that early on in the season, and then all of a sudden you're missing 4 to 6 weeks during actual game time. So I think this is a tough one to swallow as far as people that have invested in Downs. I think that he's been a nice value throughout the course of draft season. Does this drastically impact kind of the secondary pass catchers for Indianapolis? Because he's been the one that the people are targeting. Some people have been in on Adonai Mitchell. I think that Pittman, his ADP will be largely unaffected by this. I think that he's pretty much maxed out in his role, and no one else in that offense was really taking off of his plate necessarily. But I could see some AD Mitchell steam here over the next couple of weeks, especially as we get a firmer timetable. And I would like to kind of use this opportunity to say that I know he hasn't done much yet, but given where he's going, I like Alec Pierce.
Oh, there we go.
We're talking about a guy who is a top 10 percentile athlete, just a crazy athlete. And he just, I'm not going to ding him too much for not doing too much in the first 2 years of his career when he just hasn't had a whole lot of help. And obviously also Michael Pittman's just eating up so much of the targets in that offense, but he's a downfield guy, has that downfield skill set in a way that few other do in this offense. Maybe you could argue that Mitchell kind of matches him there, but Pierce is, a more seasoned guy. If AD Mitchell is a little bit rough around the edges and has a bit of that rookie learning curve, then I think people that invest a 17th or 18th round pick in Alec Pierce should end up being happy with that. And I would have endorsed that before the Josh Downs injury, but definitely after. I
mean, as far as AD Mitchell goes, we're not talking about Josh Downs missing the whole season, so we need to make that clear. But also missing valuable reps. He's going to miss the entire preseason, and in some ways, kind of coming in cold to an offense that hopefully, if Anthony Richardson stays healthy, will look a lot different than it did for the vast majority of last season. But I think, is it going to be an overreact? Are we going to see an overreaction, I should say, in terms of AD Mitchell's ADP over the next 3 weeks?
I think so, because we have kind of the perfect combination of factors. We have a rookie, we have an offense that people are excited about, and now that there's potentially vacated targets, even if it's a little bit short-sighted to take that bent, I think that there's reason why people would get really excited about him. And then AD Mitchell's combine performance was pretty unbelievable. He totally blew up last year at Texas as well, once he kind of worked his way into a bigger role, bigger than what he had during his time at Georgia. So like I could definitely see some ADP helium on AD Mitchell. I haven't like gotten in much on him right to this point, but at ADP 127, we're talking about some other guys in that range, like a Jakobi Meyers, a Dontavian Wicks, Brandon Cooks, those types of receivers that are in that range. I could see him, kind of vaulting above those guys just a little bit. I think Khalil Shakir would be kind of like my line of demarcation of how high it could go. So like pick 111 somewhere in that range. I could see him going up that far, but I don't think it would go like, crazy, like up into like the Josh Palmer tier.
All right, before we talk about some of our favorite mid to late round values at both running back and receiver, got some messages to pass along. Fantrax, a great sponsor of the show, great partner for us over at RotoWire. Is there something you wish your fantasy league had, or features that are missing from your current leagues? Bonus scoring, custom schedules or playoffs, deeper team settings? Well, look no further, because we got you covered with our friends at Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, or best ball leagues. Fantrax even offers college football fantasy leagues this season. Go check those out. Create or join a fantasy football commissioner league. Invite your friends and dominate your draft this season. Fantrax is the top dynasty fantasy football platform in the industry. Are you coming from another service? Not a problem. Fantrax can easily import any of your current leagues and rosters. Ever have a trade go wrong, make a mistake, drop in a player? Fantrax commissioner tools allow you to undo any move with just one simple click. Fantrax is running a special promotion, so you don't want to miss this. Sign up for free right now at fantrax.com/RotoWire. Do that right now. Enter for your chance to win tickets to any regular season NFL game for you and your entire league. Plus, you get $6,000 in spending cash. That's right, tickets for your entire league. Simply create a new league or bring over your existing leagues for more chances to win. Go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. We're also brought to you by ACME Real Fantasy Football. John, I got to ask you, man, what's with fantasy football scores looking like the NBA All-Star game? Let's get real. It's totally ridiculous. Let's get real. With ACME Real Fantasy Football, the top pro teams average around 28 points per game. That is how ACME Real Fantasy Football scoring is based. The system is also very accurate compared to the actual game score. Each team drafts only 9 players filling the primary positions. Benches are only used for injured and bye-week players. That leaves 200 free agents available to improve your team. Weekly waivers give preference to the bottom of the standings. League rankings are always changing, keeping it competitive the entire season. ACME Real Fantasy Football also has a one-of-a-kind playoff format, selecting a new lineup each week. All teams are competing from week 1 through the Super Bowl. 12-team leagues start at only $120. Go to acmerealfantasyfootball.com and sign up today. All right, John, let's talk some mid to late round players that we found ourselves targeting. I've done a few videos, which you can find over on the RotoWire YouTube channel, breaking down some of my favorite players, some of my favorite stayaways as well in this range. And I want to start in Seattle, John. It's somebody that I've found myself kind of loading up on, especially in best ball drafts of late. Zach Charbonnet. Where do we come in on Zach Charbonnet, who's currently, somewhere between like the RB40, the RB45, depending on what site you're looking at. So we're talking, 11th round, maybe 10th round. At that point in the draft, you're looking for running back depth. You're hopefully not selecting your first running back at that point. The more I dug into the numbers as far as Charbonnet versus Kenneth Walker go, the more I'm convinced that not necessarily that Kenneth Walker is going too high, but more so that Charbonnet is going too low, and perhaps the gap between those two should be a lot smaller than it is. The snap counts were a lot closer last season. I think we're going to see a much higher paced Seattle offense this year. This was an offense that was dead last in the NFL in terms of pace of play on offense. They ran the fewest plays on offense in the NFL last season. I think there's going to be more volume to go around. I think there's going to be more appealing passing downs where we're going to see Zach Charbonnet. And when you dig into even a lot of the advanced stats on the ground, I mean, Zach Charbonnet was just as good, if not better, than Kenneth Walker when it comes to success rate, when it comes to yards per attempt, yards per touch, yards after contact. This guy's a second-round pick last year, John. I know Kenneth Walker, similar investment. And again, I like Kenneth Walker. This is not an anti-Kenneth Walker argument. I just think there's room for both of those guys.
Yeah, I think the snap count detail is particularly interesting. And then obviously we're going to have a new offense with Ryan Grubb taking over from the University of Washington. But yeah, the snap counts were nearly identical last year. And Grubb, I'm sure, Definitely saw some Charbonnet from his UCLA days. And I got to say, like, I was a huge Charbonnet guy coming out of college, and I was surprised at some of the struggles, especially on the ground. Last season, I thought that he didn't get used quite enough, only getting the one touchdown, but still 4.3 yards per carry over 100 carries is that's above average. That's about what you'd hope for. And looking at the advanced metrics, another one, he was really low percentile in broken tackles, and that was not a problem for him in college. So understandably, you're not going to break tackles the same way on Saturdays as you do on Sundays, but I think he does have that in his profile. Like, I think that's a trait that could ultimately end up transferring. I think the offensive line should be a little bit better this year. I know they just added Connor Williams to the mix. He's not great, but I think that the Seahawks just kind of needed serviceable more than anything along that offensive line to get it trending in the right direction. So I think he is kind of someone that people aren't really talking about quite enough, that definitely deserves a little bit more love. And I think if that role repeats this year, I think that we're going to start to see more usage on a per snap basis, because, when you look at the sheer amount of touches, 33 catches and just over 100 carries, like, I think this is a player that you could convince yourself sees closer to 175, 200 total touches. And if he's doing that, I think that we're going to start to see the talent, shine through a little bit more. So, guys that I've been taking instead of him, probably a little bit more like your Blake Corum types. But at the same time, like, Charbonnet is definitely worth, getting some shares of, because I think that there is another level that we didn't quite get to see last season.
All right, I'm going to keep firing names at you, John. We'll try to get through as many as we can here. Kimani Vidal for the Chargers. Am I wrong to think that this backfield is set up well for Vidal to make some sort of tangible fantasy impact? Maybe not right away, but at some point this season. And, where he's going in drafts right now, let me give you an updated look. In the last week at the NFFC, he's going about pick 165. So, in a lot of casual leagues, you might not even have to draft Kimani Vidal. You might not even want him on your roster to begin the year. Obviously, this is a completely new roster, completely new system, completely new coaching staff for the Chargers. I don't think it's a coincidence that they brought in two ex-Ravens with Greg Roman, kind of helming that offense. But the names that they brought in, right? It's like J.K. Dobbins, loved him coming out of Ohio State, torched the Badgers multiple times. He was somebody that was really fun to watch. He's going to be a shell of himself, right? He's torn his ACL. He's torn his LCL. He's coming off of a torn Achilles. He's arguably the most injury-prone running back in the NFL. And if things break right and he stays healthy, then yeah, maybe he's got a little bit left in the tank. But I'm not optimistic that happens. And then the other name is Gus Edwards, who is a very serviceable NFL starting running back, but he's ultimately a mid-level, low-level starter at best. I don't think this Chargers team is going to be all that good. You got Justin Herbert dealing with a plantar fascia injury already. You're in a really, really competitive AFC. And, it's not the NBA where you just say, all right, well, we're turning it over to the young guys midway through the year. I get that. Like, they're still going to be trying to win games. But I think Vidal brings something to this backfield that J.K. Dobbins, after all these injuries, and Gus Edwards at this point in his career simply don't. I mean, I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are on him as a prospect, because he doesn't have the draft pedigree of someone like Charbonnet, where there's this kind of internal obligation of, oh man, we spent a second round pick. We got to get him in the mix.
Right. So, Vidal is a guy who, comes out of Troy. He's undersized. But if you can look past that, there's so much to like about his prospect profile. I mean, being 5'8", 215, it's like tackling a fire hydrant or something like that. That's just a low anchor no, you don't. It sounds painful. And he's got 4.46 speed. He's a guy that handled total workhorse volume during his time in college, almost 300 carries last year, over 200 carries in 2022. So he has that ability, and he's not going to get that type of workload, of course, with the Chargers, but at the same time, all it takes is that one domino in front of him to fall, right? Like you were saying, Dobbins, I love him too, but the track record of running backs coming back from Achilles is pretty negligible. There aren't a ton of success cases to really point to. And Edwards, I think some people have oversold the amount to which he kind of regressed last season. But I think he's still that guy that Harbaugh's really going to like. He gets the hard yardage. He probably does still profile better in those short yardage situations. But if Vidal can, help out in the passing game, he had over 20 catches in a bunch of his seasons at Troy. I think that he's worth it at ADP. I mean, I'm not worried about like an Isaiah Spiller or anything like that. I think that Vidal makes this roster. I'm probably a little bit overinvested in Vidal. If I'm being honest, I'm at 20% shares. I'm probably going to put a buying freeze on that, but I think that he's definitely someone that's worth taking where he goes. And yeah, like you said, it's might not be something where week one you're like already like doing the victory dance or anything, but later on in the season, especially if Edwards or Dobbins get a little bit nicked up, Vidal can step right in. And he can do everything that the Chargers would ask him for within that backfield function. So I do like Vidal where he's going.
All right, I got two more backs I want to throw at you, and there's some pushback I think on both of these, and we'll start with Rico Dowdle in Dallas. Going right now as the RB 49, so we're talking about pick 145, pick 150 in the NFFC. I'm just not a big Zeke guy at this point in his career. I know there's obviously the connection with him playing in Dallas in the past. I don't think Zeke was. He's kind of a punchline going into last year and actually had a much better season than most expected, myself included, in New England. So I'm not saying he's completely washed up, but he's at this point in his career, he's not a bell cow back. He's not anything close to that. And look, Rico Dowdle isn't either. Like, he's arguably had opportunities to do more in this backfield, and they haven't necessarily given him those opportunities. I think there's the fear that Dallas could bring somebody in, whether that's, between now and week one or at some point early in the season to compete with Zeke and Rico Dowdle. And obviously that would be an issue, but for somebody who's going as essentially the RB 50, you could get kind of for free at the end of a lot of drafts. I think there's enough upside here. I mean, Dowdle is by far the most explosive back in that backfield right now. This is a team that led the NFL in scoring last season, spent a ton of time in the red zone. Yeah, there's a case that if they're on the 2-yard line, that carry's probably going to Ezekiel Elliott. I get that, but if Dallas has dreams of winning this division, of making the Super Bowl, which I think they do, and they have some other questions that they need to address, primarily CeeDee Lamb more than anything, but you're going to need some offensive explosion in this backfield. It can't just be Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb carrying the offense like it was for so much of last season. So I just think at cost, I'm willing to take the risk on Rico Dowdle. I know, again, that there are some people out there that just don't think he's that guy. They think that, maybe the opportunity should have been there by now and it hasn't. But this is more wide open than it's been at any point. Tony Pollard's gone. Ezekiel Elliott's not the same guy that he was 4 years ago. And again, we can speculate that they bring somebody in, but until they do that, I'm buying a lot more Rico Dowdle than I am Zeke Elliott.
I just think that with Dowdle, in his case, his career high in carries was, 133, and that was a long time ago. That was 2016. Right. So we haven't seen him handle a huge workhorse workload. The selling point to me when it comes to Dowdle is the general offensive health. It's an offense that should be pretty high scoring, should be spending a lot of time in the red zone, like you said. But I don't know. I'm not certain that he's talented enough to like make Dallas just be like, yeah, no, he's our guy every single week. I could see some frustrating usage patterns, or I could see him just kind of failing with the opportunity. And I don't know if they have the answer on the roster as it currently stands. It's actually a pretty awful looking depth chart, all the way down to like your Snoop Connor types. There's just not a guy that
Snoop Connor. All right.
That's right. I just think that, I don't know, like you look at this backfield and really Dowdle is the only one that you could like maybe spec some upside on there. There's a lot of retreads. Otherwise, I mean, Dowdle, I do feel like the general fantasy community is overhyped what he did last year in limited sample. I don't know. I think I'm mostly staying away from him. What did you say his ADP was on the NFC? Because in Underdog, it's a much different conversation. He's like an 11th round pick.
On the NFFC, his ADP is 145 right now.
Okay, so that's about a good round after where he's going on Underdog, and obviously there's scoring differential with PPR versus half point, but I think I'm more comfortable taking a Zach Charbonnet than I am a Rico Dowdle, like kind of tie this conversation together.
Okay, fair enough. Another name I want to throw your way, Kendre Miller of the New Orleans Saints, and credit to our guy Jim Coventry, who has been just beating the drum for Kendre Miller throughout this offseason. I want to buy in. I do. But, for one, Kendre Miller was hurt essentially all of last season. We saw him for basically 2 games. And, he's dealing with an injury now. We've already seen Dennis Allen basically publicly express his frustrations of like, yeah, man, if you're not healthy, we're just not going to be able to evaluate you. We're not going to be able to put you on the field. That threw some cold water on it for me. Seeing a head coach be that blunt about it with the media, that is concerning. But to me, it also doesn't change some of the regression that we saw from Alvin Kamara last season. And again, hat tip to our guy, Jim, who did the research on this. Kamara was 15th percentile in broken tackle rate last year, 27th percentile in yards after contact, 24th percentile in yards after the catch. Like, it was 100% volume, right? He hauled in 75 catches in 13 games. One of those catches went for a touchdown. I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll see a better version of the Saints offense this year. They brought in a new OC, Clint Kubiak. I think they're at least trying to take the steps to address that. Obviously, Kamara is still the guy, much like the Charbonnet Walker thing. I'm not necessarily anti-Kamara. I have plenty of shares of Kamara, but there's enough invested in Kendre Miller that I think they at least want him to be involved. You still got Jamal Williams hanging around on this roster. I guess I'll start by asking you, how much are you scared off by the fact that Kendre Miller is already injured again, and that seems to be kind of making its way to the coaching staff?
Yeah, it's frustrating. He was always like an alluring guy, but earlier on in draft season where it's like, I do think that Alvin Kamara is effectively close to washed at this point. But the coaching staff remains the same, at least the Dennis Allen detail. And it feels like they're just going to continue to just use Kamara as much as they possibly can and not mix in a ton of other running backs. So, Kendre Miller's ADP has changed drastically, I think, in light of the training camp. So, he's going at like pick 187 on Underdog. So that's more palatable if you want to continue to speculate on him. But I do, maybe this is a test of my ability to read coach speak and whatnot. But I am concerned by what's coming out of New Orleans when it comes to Kendre Miller. I think the price dip is enough to where I'm not completely out on him, but where I got him, about 3 rounds earlier, I'm not feeling great about that ending up being a profit.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's a good breakdown. And, if he can get healthy and show something in the preseason, these things can develop and change quickly. And for my sake, I hope it does. Let's talk about a few receivers before we get out of here, John. Guys that are a little bit higher up the board. We're talking about somebody here who's the wide receiver 53 in the last week at the NFC, ADP hovering around 120. Jakobi Meyers. I'm buying in on Jakobi Meyers in Vegas. This is a guy who is a career great season by his standards, despite terrible quarterback play. Merchant. This is kind of what he does, is just sign up to be in a terrible situation and somehow just end up making it work. He's put up 3 straight 800+ yard seasons despite terrible QB play in both Vegas and New England. 106 targets in 16 games last season in Vegas. That was only 3 fewer than Nico Collins. That was more targets than Brandon Aiyuk saw last season. Found his way into the end zone 10 times. He always scores more touchdowns than the numbers imply that he should. For someone who's going in the 10th round right now in a 12-team league, I'm willing to pay that price. He's found his way into top 30 receiver value in PPR in each of the last 3 seasons. And there's still this carrot dangling out there for me of like, man, if Devontae Adams forces his way out, all of a sudden, maybe we have a half season of Jakobi Meyers as think about what that could mean, John, the number 1 target in an Aiden O'Connell offense.
Oh yeah. Stop. I'm sweating. But when it comes to Meyers, you bring up great points. He's not exciting, but he's consistent and he's going to be out there. And where he goes in drafts, there isn't much in the way of receivers. You do have the Dontavian Wicks that we mentioned earlier, your Brandon Cooks. But Meyers, that at least the floor is really high. I have trouble selling myself on players that I viewed to not have a particularly huge ceiling. But at the same time, you kind of need those guys if you have a kind of riskier build with the rest of your receivers, younger guys, or I don't know, to draw an example from your Jags, I like Brian Thomas this year in best ball, but I absolutely understand that you need to back him up with someone that is going to be a week-to-week producer just in case, the weeks where Thomas is a dud. So I think it's roster build dependent, but I think Meyers has the goods. And I think the introduction of Brock Bowers in that offense, I think that should just kind of help everyone. They can't just completely load up on Devontae Adams and Meyers. They're going to have to account for Bowers. So it's not the sexiest pick, but I do like Meyers where he goes.
Yeah, I think you summed it up really well. And you look at some of the other receivers that go around him. I mean, he's like 3 spots behind Brian Thomas in terms of average ADP. Josh Palmer goes a little bit below him. Rashid Shaheed. It's like, Josh Downs isn't that far behind. It's like there are players who conceivably have higher upside that if that's what you're shooting for, especially in best ball, I totally understand that. But if you just want the stability, if you want the Tobias Harris, that's where I'm fine. Leaning on Jakobi Meyers. I think the production with bad quarterback play to me just speaks for itself. Like he's basically going in at the same pick as Tyler Lockett. Like I really like Jakobi Meyers over Tyler Lockett. I think maybe there's a similar floor there. And this leads me into the next guy that I want to talk about, who is Jaxon Smith-Njigba. I think this is the year we see JSN overtake Tyler Lockett, at least for that number 2 spot in Seattle. You could talk about, what you thought of Jaxon Smith-Njigba as a prospect, but correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, going into his final season at Ohio State, which kind of turned into, I wouldn't say a disaster, but just a weird year where he's in and out and he's sitting out games, and is he hurt or is he not? I mean, we were talking about JSN not as like a top 3 pick necessarily, but somebody who likely would have gone higher, would have been a borderline top 10 pick in the NFL draft, and I think would have carried a little bit more reputational cachet. But he's still a first round pick. Like you don't take Jaxon Smith-Njigba saying like, yeah, we're looking for a third receiver, just somebody who can help out. Like the idea is that this guy is a big time foundational piece for you. I thought he was better as a rookie than he's given credit for. It was a little frustrating, wasn't used quite as much as you'd like, but that was also met with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett for the most part staying healthy. I think we see some more regression from Tyler Lockett that already started to set in last season. I'm optimistic on what the Seattle offense can be with a new coaching staff. Where do you come in on Smith-Njigba?
Yeah, I really like the grub hire. I think, he created an offense at Washington, and it's not going to be exactly the same, but, it was one that got usable production in the college end for 3 different guys. So like this is an offense that should theoretically not be overweight on any one player. And, for me, like, I'm a huge year 2 breakout guy. Like usually my rosters are littered with 2nd-year receivers. I haven't gotten enough JSN, and I'm having some FOMO right now. It's early enough to correct it. But I mean, he was a guy going into that 2022 college football season where like he was the guy. Like everyone was so excited for him after his Rose Bowl performance. It was supposed to be on, and gets that hamstring against Notre Dame, doesn't really play the rest of the way. So I think that you need to remember like how you felt about him coming out of that Rose Bowl, and how he played alongside guys like Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. And it's like, okay, that guy's still in there. Give him a break. Give him some time to get acclimated to the NFL level. Maybe he didn't have as fast of a start as those 2 guys did at the NFL level, but there's a good amount of talent there. I don't know if he's like a game-breaking wide receiver 1 type, but I think that he can be really solid if they start to give him more targets. And I think that should absolutely be the case this year.
Any players that you're keeping an eye on, running backs or receivers specifically in this general range, which I understand is a wide range. Like I'm not sitting here claiming that Jaxon Smith-Njigba is like the biggest sleeper in the world, but well outside of the, top 30 wide receivers or, the top 25 to 30 running backs, is there anybody who typically goes, pick 90 to pick 170 who you find yourself to be higher on than the market consensus?
I have plenty of Rashid Shaheed. I do like his upside in that offense. I am cautiously optimistic about the Saints offense this year as well. Probably a little bit overweight on Rashad Bateman. I think that he is just simply too cheap. I know that people, point out Mark Andrews and Zay Flowers are going to be the main guys there, but what Bateman does is different than those guys. It's not redundant. I think that can open up a different part of that offense entirely for Baltimore. And that's big of me to say that, considering how critical I was of Bateman last year. You can see my tweets about that. And then a little bit later on, I do like Jalen Tolbert as kind of like a hedge to be a contributor in that Cowboys offense, assuming that they continue a really pass-happy approach and maybe Brandon Cooks falls off just a little bit. I think Tolbert being almost free in drafts is really, really interesting to me. And then another late-round guy, Buzzy, but Dylan Laube in Vegas, pass catching guy. I don't think Zamir White is good at all at catching passes. So I think that Laube is, I could see him getting up into the 16th round by the time the draft season's over. Right now, he's a little bit cheaper than that. definitely put the stamp on him. And then I do like Khalil Shakir as well, where he goes. So kind of bounced around the ADP there, but those have been some of my like mid to late round targets that I have good amount of exposure to.
All right, I just want to ask one follow-up, and then we'll wrap this thing up. Is your interest in Dylan Laube linked at all to a disinterest in Zamir White overall? Because I think there's just been this kind of refrain of, well, Zamir White, he's the very clear starter in Las Vegas. He's an NFL starter. That's worth something. There are some Alexander Madison vibes, who's ironically now on this Raiders roster. But I think we kind of went through that with him last year in Minnesota, right? It's like, well, he's now the clear guy. Dalvin Cook is gone. How could this go wrong? Are you in on Zamir White at cost? Is there a world in which this goes completely south?
I'm kind of surprised at how light I am on Zamir White. I think it's probably because I'm a little bit over on James Conner. But at the same time, I'm a Zeus believer in a certain sense. I think he's a good between the tackles guy. I think we're far enough away from his injuries to where like you're not as concerned about them as you would have been during his time in college or earlier on in his NFL career. I think there's just no one else on that offense that I can see taking on the conventional, early down carries from Zamir White. So I think the volume will be there. He's going to have to be an accumulator. He's going to have to stay healthy. Probably not a ton of like huge weeks, but I think he's going to be consistently giving you like 10 to 12 fantasy points every single week in half point PPR. And that should be enough. But, I think that you can like both Laube and White at their particular ADPs without, having to say one or the other. And, it wouldn't be a backfield that I'm completely against getting both pieces to.
No interest in Amir Abdullah.
No, actually, no. I'm sorry to say this is not 2014 Nebraska. Less interested in Amir Abdullah as I used to be a decade ago. That's growth.
Amazing that he's still in the league. I mean, this is
right?
This is a wild run for a guy who's like never really been good whatsoever to still be holding down a spot on this depth chart. We'll see if he ends up making the team. I don't know. We got him as the RB2 right now, but good call on Dylan Laube. Starting to pick up some steam. I like that one. John, it's been great hosting with you, man. This is unfortunately a one-off. I'm subbing in for Jeff. I had to pull you off the street to be my co-host, but we'll hopefully fit in more of these, some bonus episodes. We'll be on the RotoWire NFL betting pod once week one rolls around. Very, very excited to get that going with you. And on the way out, I should have mentioned this at the top in the breaking news portion of the pod. Congratulations on your engagement, John McKechnie.
Much appreciated. Thank you. We're really excited. Got engaged over the weekend to my longtime girlfriend. Upgraded the package now. She's my fiance. It feels cool to say that, and I appreciate you giving me a moment to wax poetic about that.
All right, yeah. Next time we do a pod, we'll have to bring that fiance on and get her take on how the engagement went.
She can be a Finns insider. She's from Miami.
There we have it. All right, John. Great stuff, man. Appreciate you joining me. On the way out, want to give a shout out to Acme Real Fantasy Football. Go check them out. AcmeRealFantasyFootball.com. If you want to get in on the Circa Million contest, you want to get in on Circa Survivor, go check out CircaSports.com. You can see all the details there. Highly, highly encourage you to sign up for one, if not both of those contests. And you can multi-enter them as well. It's a ton of fun playing in the Circa contest. We also want to thank Fantrax, one of the presenting sponsors of this pod. Go get that deal right now. Fantrax.com/RotoWire. For John McKechnie, I'm Nick Whalen. We'll talk to you soon.